assemblies. I'll start with showing you the components you need to make for this first assembly, where you have to make the components. So the assembly, that's just the assembly. The assembly looks like this. So that's what your final assembly one, engine one assignment would look like. This is just a bar to represent the crankshaft, connecting rod. The blue one is the piston pin, and the rest is the piston. So let's look at each one of them. So we're in the assembly environment now, and in the assembly you bring in parts. So this is made of a bunch of parts: the crankshaft, connecting rod, piston pin, and piston. And there's another piece. There's a standard part that you would grab from the library, is the external retaining ring. So yeah, I'm going to build this, but first let me show you how you build each component. So that's the crankshaft, just a cylinder, and it has a groove in it. It's a standard groove for a retaining ring. So you don't model that groove, you just bring it in. You insert that into your part from the tools. So I'll show you how that works. All right, so it has two things. It has an extrude, which is that one, and the groove for a standard retaining ring. So that's the first part. The second one is this one, which starts with an extrusion like that. That's the hole for piston pin, and that's the hole for the crankshaft. And then make it a little smaller to reduce the weight, and then add a couple of fillets to one here and one there to make it look reasonably decent. Of course, the real thing has a lot of other features, but this is good enough. Okay, so that's and the more difficult one part is this piston. Which has a couple of bosses here. There are extrusions that end to next. So when you extrude this and say end to next, it automatically stops it here at this surface and at that surface. Otherwise, it's not easy to make that. Okay, so the first one is just the revolve. It has all those ring features in it. The next one is a plane. Okay, see that plane? I need to build the profile of that boss on this plane so I can extrude it then toward the wall of that piston and say stop there. So that's why I use that plane. Okay, if you look at that, this sketch, it's sketch plane is plane 1. So I'm drawing on the sketch plane, and it just has that shape. There's nothing special about it. It's just that. Okay. The important thing is that when you look at the edit feature, the extrude feature, it has up to next. Means that extrude until you hit a surface, whatever surface that is, that stops it, stop there. Most of the operations, feature operations you have, has merged results, meaning that make it one piece rather than multiple pieces. But you know, sometimes that's unchecked, and you end up with multiple pieces, and everything after that you do is puzzling why it's doing something bizarre. So if that happens, check to see how many bodies there are. If it's more than one body, it means that it didn't merge at some point. So you need to go and check and make sure that this merge would result in one part. Okay, after that you would cut the hole and then mirror it to get the other part. Very good. Okay, so now I'm going to make an assembly. Let's say we have made the parts, and I'm going to make an assembly out of it. So let's start a new part and call it an assembly. Say OK. So in an assembly, I can bring in the parts that I want, one at a time. So crankshaft is the first one I want to put in, and that's the fixed one. You can pick that, and if you click on this OK, then it fixes it to the assembly coordinate system. So that would be a fixed part, and usually your first part is your fixed part. Okay, so what do we get? I have an assembly file. It has coordinate frame, and which your first part is kind of fixed to that. So that's the front, that's the top, and that's the right. I have one part that is fixed, and I'm going to have a bunch of mates. Right now I don't have anything because that's the first part. I didn't make it with anything. Yeah, so that's the first part. If you don't want this to be the fixed part, and later on you change your mind, you want the piston to be the fixed part, all you have to do is right click on that and say float. If you say float, then it is free to move. So there's always ways to change things. Nothing is cast in stone. Everything is changeable. Okay, so that's the first part. Now the second part, it's a good practice for you to bring these parts one at a time. Don't bring all of them at the same time and then try to make them together. Bring one at a time as they mate the current part, okay? So what makes this is the connecting rod. So I'll bring in the connecting rod and mate to it before I go somewhere else. Okay, so you say insert, component, existing component, and the connecting rod. And then if you click here, it also fixes it, but we already fixed something, so you only need to have one item fixed in an assembly, and everything else would be free to move. So you just drop it somewhere. Okay. All right. Next, we basically assemble this to the existing part, and it's very important to make these mates based on a physical basis. Okay, if you align things that have no physical basis, your assembly is not going to be like that. An assembly requires a physical contact for it to work. The same thing applies here. If you don't do that, at the end, it might look good. For example, click on this mate. Okay, so this one mates to that, because that's where the contact happens. Make sure you follow the physics or the mechanics of it. It also works if I do that, because they're both, those two circles, cylinders are concentric. So when you say mate, it makes the axis of one equal to it. So it looks okay, and it does everything that we want. It rotates like that. In this case, it's not a problem, but when you have a real complicated device, you might end up with 200 mates. Okay, I'll list several pages, and they all show up here. In the assembly, I'll show you. If something goes wrong, it's very, very difficult to chase down the error if you just randomly align things without a physical basis. Okay. So I have had situation where I myself had an assembly, was complicated, was tens of mates, something went wrong. I spend more time trying to find out what mate is the bad one than rebuilding the whole assembly from scratch. So yeah, if you follow some of these good practice guidelines, that not only it helps you with error checking, but also it helps you with the physics of it. All right. If for some reason I can't put this together, right, then I know there's something wrong with the design, because they have to be put together. So it also allows you to check your design when you put the assembly together the way you think it should put together. So you can also check and detect errors in the design. Okay, so when we put together the mates, you have several options. Most of the time it recognizes what it needs, so when I clicked on that and clicked on that, it recognized that they need to be concentric. Okay, so it didn't have to do that. So what happens 90%, 95% of the time, it's the surfaces that mate. Okay, so again, if you pick a circle, a line, or an edge, and make that, it might look good, but I would guarantee that somewhere down the line in the process, you get into conflicts, because lines don't mate physically. You have surfaces that mate physically. So be careful when you're doing this. 90% of the time, it's the surfaces that you pick. Although this allows you to pick lines, pick points. In special cases, you might need to do that, but 90% of the time, you would deal with surfaces rather than Okay, so let's say okay and see what we got. Now the mates has something in it, and it's just a concentric. And it says this one is coaxial or concentric with this one. But that's the wrong one, as I said, because physically this surface doesn't make that surface. It just happens to be acceptable as a shape. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And do it right. Say mate, this one to that one. Okay, so far so good. Now, because this is really a partial assembly, this doesn't have any constraint. So I added, usually you have shoulders of these or bearings on the faces, so this crankshaft cannot move outside. But in this case, we just have a very simplified version of this crankshaft. So what I did is just give you an opportunity to practice something. I'm going to create a groove on this, which you see is a standard groove. Then I'm going to bring a component from the library, which is a retaining ring, and I put it there, and then I'm going to butt this against that. Okay, so I'll do that later. I'll bring in, what should I bring in next? The piston pin, right? So let's insert piston pin. Use that, drop it there, and then make this surface to that. Okay. Okay, where should we put it? There's no physical anything that this would butt against. But if you look at this, the design is such that it really cannot move too much, and this is okay. So yeah, there's some flexibility there, but that boss there, or the projection there, helps to keep it in the center and not to the sides. So I really don't have something to physically show that, because it has some play there, and it hits this side or that side, so it can't go out. One way is to just fix it here at this distance, wherever you can just put it in the middle or some ballpark value. The other one is that I can put this right in the middle, so it's always centered. We know it's not exactly centered because it has the ability to move a little bit, but that's okay. So to do that, I'm going to find a plane that's the center plane of this part and the center plane of that part, and then I'll match those planes. Okay, so let's see what we have for the piston pin. Do I have that plane there? Let me check the. So this is the features in the piston pin. Okay, and that's the front plane. Top. Okay, so I do have a plane there, the top plane. If I didn't have it, then I have to go into the model for that part and create that plane. But now I have it. What about the other one, which is the crankshaft? The connecting rod. If I do have a center plane here as well, then I can just go and make them. If it's not, then I have to go into the model for this and create that. Okay, so the connecting rod, the front plane is not it, that's on the edge. So the top and the right planes also are not it. Let me see the right plane, yeah. So I needed to create that plane to be right in the middle. and that's the plane 1. So that's a reference plane, which is right in the middle. Okay, so I need the plane 1 mating the top plane of that. Okay, so I'll say mate. For the piston pin, I have the top surface, and for the connecting rod, I have plane 1. Okay.
Question?
Sorry?
So, like, if you didn't already have that plane made, can you have the part open at the same time and be like editing the part and editing the assembly?
Sure.
And it'll update?
There are 2 ways you can edit. You can edit it in place in the assembly, which I don't recommend because you have all the other assembly, it gets confusing. I never do that myself. But you can also right click and say edit part. Okay, open part. This is edit in place. Okay, so why does that? Oh, I started a new assembly. So say assembly 5. So this is editing in the context of assembly. I find it to be more confusing than helpful. All right. So I know ahead of time what kind of modification I need, so I don't go into edit in the context of assembly. I just go into the part. I just open the part and change it right here. Whatever I want to do, and then go back to the assembly.
And then follow-up question:
Yeah.
if you've got a part that's in an assembly, and then you go back to edit that part and make a change that conflicts with something that's going on in the assembly, will it give you an error, or like?
It does. The only thing that can go wrong are the mates. For example, if you have a surface on the part that is mating with something, and you go ahead and remove that surface, it comes back into the assembly and say, okay, that's an error, I can't find that surface.
But you would get the error when you went and opened the assembly back
When
up.
you open
Like,
the assembly,
for instance, if you went and made your crankshaft wider without making the hole in your connecting rod wider when you open the assembly,